En 2015, la ONU aprobó la Agenda 2030 sobre el Desarrollo Sostenible, una oportunidad para que los países y sus sociedades pudieran trabajar en forma mancomunada hacia la eliminación de la pobreza, la lucha frente al cambio climático, la educación, la igualdad de la mujer, la defensa del medio ambiente y el hábitat principalmente. A pesar de esta agenda en marcha, la desigualdad y la pobreza siguen desafiando a América Latina. Y hoy, esos desafíos se profundizan aún más bajo el azote de la pandemia ocasionada por el COVID-19. Quienes construyen respuestas a estos desafíos sociales y económicos se preguntan día a día cómo optimizar sus iniciativas para lograr mejores resultados. La inversión por impacto es un enfoque innovador que ya se implementa en el mundo y se empieza a gestar en la región. Este enfoque tiene como propósito apoyar y catalizar soluciones innovadoras a problemas sociales y ambientales, asumiendo riesgos que ningún otro actor está dispuesto a tomar. Sus tres ejes principales son financiación a la medida, apoyo no financiero y gestión y medición de impacto. Para recoger y compartir la manera como los actores en América Latina están abordando esta perspectiva, Latimpacto entrevistó a más de 180 conocedores en 7 países de la región y recogió un amplio conocimiento y experiencias para construir su primer estudio sobre inversión social e impacto en América Latina. Los 37 casos documentados y analizados que aquí se presentan proponen tendencias en materia de vehículos de financiamiento, apoyo no financiero, estrategias de salida o alianzas. Tendencias que resultarán inspiradoras para aquellos inversionistas sociales y filántropos decididos a generar mayor impacto en una región donde también crecen las oportunidades. Agradecemos a nuestros fundadores pioneros que desde el primer momento creyeron en Latimpacto y a todos los actores que han hecho posible este estudio.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Muchísimas gracias por estar hoy con nosotros, sobre todo los que nos han seguido toda la semana. Ha sido una jornada o una maratón de eventos, 15 eventos en una semana. Entonces, por un lado, personalmente estoy contento de acabarlo, pero también contento de tener aquí a Jorge, un amigo del pasado, y gracias a este informe nos volvimos a reconectar. Jorge, bienvenido.
Gracias.
Y Jorge nos va a hablar un poquito de cómo es el proceso de inversión desde el lado de Acumen, cómo lo ven ellos. Y también le pedí que nos hablara un poquito de lo que ellos llaman Lean Data, que es una metodología para medir el impacto. Entonces, al final de esta sesión, por lo menos a nivel personal, Jorge, me gustaría entender mucho algo que ustedes tienen dentro de su ADN y que promueven mucho, que es el capital paciente. Y también entender un poquito lo que también hablan ustedes, que son un fondo de inversión Impact First. Entonces, pues más tarde hablaremos de eso. Antes de empezar, me gustaría dar un par de reglas y contarles también qué es Latimpacto. Yo soy Alan Wagenberg, soy el director de gestión de conocimiento de Latimpacto. Y en Latimpacto lo que buscamos es trabajar con una comunidad de filántropos e inversionistas sociales para maximizar su impacto socioambiental. Y eso lo hacemos a través de conexiones en el sentido de que buscamos que cada vez más haya impacto escalable, que haya cambios sistémicos, y para eso necesitamos trabajar conectadamente. El segundo eje es todo el tema de gestión de conocimiento, donde documentamos, socializamos y aprendemos conjuntamente cuáles son las mejores prácticas. Para eso tenemos cursos, investigaciones y también muchos espacios para aprender entre pares. Y finalmente es tener una voz unificada para amplificar nuestro mensaje y lograr movilizar más capital social más capital financiero e intelectual para que haya más impacto en la región. Nuestros principios son 4. Por un lado, conectamos todo el continuo del capital. Eso quiere decir que tratamos de conectar desde los filántropos tradicionales hasta los inversionistas tradicionales, tratando de que cada uno entienda que es un actor en ese continuo del capital y que si nos articulamos mucho mejor podemos escalar más las soluciones sociales y ambientales. Trabajamos con distintos silos, creemos que para solucionar estos retos que afronta América Latina necesitamos traer no solo a las fundaciones, no solo a los inversionistas de impacto, pero a otros actores como el sector público, las universidades, las empresas, y ver cómo podemos cada vez más trabajar más y tener una solución mucho más integral, entender los problemas de una mirada más integral y encontrar esas soluciones. También somos muy locales. Eso quiere decir que somos una red 100% latinoamericana. A pesar de mi apellido, Alan Wagenberg, yo soy colombiano, entonces sí seguimos siendo colombianos y regionales, pero también trabajamos de la mano con nuestras redes hermanas en Europa, Asia y África. Entonces, tanto traemos las mejores prácticas que hay en estos continentes, pero también aportamos nosotros a estas redes hermanas. Recomendaciones para el día, por favor usar mute si no están hablando, pero si queremos una participación activa, esperamos que hayan leído el caso antes de venir acá, entonces es aprovechar el tiempo de Jorge y hacer todas las preguntas que el caso les haya generado, si tienen dudas o hay conceptos que quieran profundizar, este es el momento de aprovechar el conocimiento de Jorge. Por favor, identificarse para poder llamarlos con su perfil de Zoom, saber con quiénes estamos, usar las cámaras, por favor, para que Jorge sepa, por un lado, si los está durmiendo o si los tienen despierto, pero sé que Jorge no los va a dejar dormir. Y por último, también utilicen el chat si quieren aportar, compartir también otra información paralela a lo que se está discutiendo en audio. Finalmente, importante también para aquellos que nos acompañan de Estados Unidos o de Europa, de otro lugar, San Andrés Islas, el Caribe, también tenemos interpretación simultánea, entonces pueden activar eso ya. De una vez agradezco a Soraya que nos acompaña el día de hoy. Y simplemente abajo en su pantalla en Zoom van a ver un mundito. Ahí solo es oprimirlo y seleccionar inglés si quieren escuchar la interpretación en inglés. Si quieren seguir en español, no tienen que hacer nada más. Nuevamente, esto es un estudio, toda esta semana de lanzamiento es parte de un estudio que lanzamos donde analizamos 37 casos de estudio y entrevistamos a más de 180 personas para identificar tendencias de la inversión por impacto. Y dado que esto es relacionado al proceso de inversión el día de hoy, pues quería compartir y una de las preguntas que le voy a adelantar a Jorge para que nos ayude a entenderlo un poco más desde el punto de vista de Acumen es el tema de las estrategias de salida, ¿no? Aquí vemos que el 68% de los inversionistas por impacto que identificamos tienen una estrategia de salida, pero curiosamente solo el 35% lo establece desde el comienzo. Entonces creemos que esa es una oportunidad de mejora para el ecosistema y pues la idea con Jorge es también entender un poco cómo lo hace Acumen. Entonces, como les dije, los invitamos a visitar la página web del micrositio ecosistema.latimpacto.org, donde podrán ver el caso de Acumen. También hay videos y a partir de lunes subiremos 8 casos más y la siguiente semana otros y la siguiente otros para completar esos 37. En el micrositio se pueden inscribir para poder saber cuándo se han subido nuevos casos. Entonces los invitamos que nos acompañen a eso. Entonces, ya sin más anuncios parroquiales, dejo de compartir mi pantalla, le doy nuevamente la bienvenida a Jorge. Jorge, antes de que empieces, cuéntanos de pronto un poquito más allá de que sabemos que trabajas en Acumen, que eres el director asociado, ¿quién es Jorge? La última vez que creo que te vi, estabas estudiando en Washington, en American University, entonces cuéntanos un poco más de quién es Jorge como persona.
Gracias, Alan. Me encanta verte y muchísimas gracias a Latin Park por la invitación. Jorge de Angulo, soy economista de la Universidad de los Andes. Inicialmente inicié mi carrera acá en Colombia trabajando para Citibank en la parte de banca corporativa y después me fui para Estados Unidos a trabajar unos años en una empresa que manejaba los derechos de fútbol de Centroamérica y el Caribe y después trabajé unos años en Venture Capital en Miami también y después, como dice Alan, me fui a Washington, hice una maestría y poco tiempo después de eso me metí en el mundo de inversión de impacto que en esa época era relativamente incipiente. Entré a trabajar con una organización que se llama Acción Internacional, que tenía una serie de fondos enfocados más que todo en inclusión financiera. Entonces trabajé en un fondo de capital, primero en un fondo de garantías y después en un fondo de capital privado para ellos, proveyendo básicamente instrumentos de deuda o, o inversiones de capital para instituciones de microfinanzas que se llamaban en esa época y luego pues estas avanzaron y se volvieron los bancos de microfinanzas pues tal vez más reconocidos de Latinoamérica, Banco Sol, Mi Banco, Banco Compartir aquí en Colombia, que fue después absorbido por Mi Banco y mi enfoque pues siempre fue regional y hace un poquito más de un año y medio estoy de regreso en Colombia. Yo soy colombiano pues de origen y crecí en esta ciudad y entonces estoy en Bogotá trabajando para la oficina de Latinoamérica de Acumen, muy contento con no solo estar de regreso en Colombia, sino con tener la oportunidad de mirar este estilo de inversiones tan interesantes que hace Acumen en las regiones de Colombia. Eso en pocas palabras es lo que soy yo.
Buenísimo, Jorge. Pues muchísimas gracias. Entonces, si quieres ya proceder con tu presentación, vamos a tener unos 15 minuticos de presentación de Jorge y luego pues lo abrimos a preguntas.
Perfecto, ¿me están oyendo bien y están viendo mi pantalla? ¿Me
Sí.
confirman? Ok, perfecto. Entonces, como probablemente la mayoría de ustedes leyeron el caso, Acumen y Cacao de Colombia tienen una relación pues estrecha desde hace un tiempo porque Acumen invirtió en Cacao de Colombia. Entonces la idea es mirar un poco una información de contexto acerca de Acumen, acerca de Cacao de Colombia y enfocándonos un poco en la parte de medición de impacto con la metodología de Lindeira, que es propietaria de Acumen y con la cual medimos el impacto de la gran mayoría de nuestras inversiones. Acumen es un fondo de inversión de impacto que invierte en emprendedores extraordinarios cuyos negocios están cambiando la vida de las comunidades más vulnerables del mundo. Acumen existe desde el 2001 y la sede principal queda en la ciudad de Nueva York. Y desde hace un poquito más de 8 años, desde el 2013, abrimos una oficina aquí en Latinoamérica y la central para Latinoamérica está localizada en Bogotá desde entonces. Desde el punto de vista regional, el fondo se enfoca principalmente en Colombia, Perú y las repúblicas de Centroamérica, pero con un poco más regional. Y en Colombia hemos hecho un trabajo específico en la Colombia rural y más específicamente en las zonas de postconflicto. En el Fondo Pionero invertimos tradicionalmente en empresas en etapa temprana que están probando sus modelos de negocio y últimamente hemos empezado a incursionar en un modelo muy interesante que es invertir de la mano con comunidades. Eh, el fondo pionero, que es el que manejamos principalmente en Acumen, adicional del fondo Alive, que es el otro fondo más nuevo de Acumen, pero el fondo pionero de Acumen está bajo la sombrilla de la ONG y tiene la particularidad que se nutre con donaciones, es decir, con capital filantrópico. En Colombia, los principales aliados han sido la Agencia de Cooperación Internacional de Estados Unidos, USAID, Fundación Bancolombia y el Fondo Multidonante de las Naciones Unidas para el Sostenimiento de la Paz. Y esto es importante, ¿por qué? Porque al tener donantes y no inversionistas, y al ser el fondo pionero un fondo abierto y no un fondo cerrado como un fondo tradicional, tiene la posibilidad de hacer dos cosas que muchos inversionistas no pueden hacer. Uno, como Alan lo estaba mencionando, la posibilidad de invertir capital paciente. Nuestro horizonte de inversión es mucho más amplio que el de un inversionista tradicional. Podemos estar invertidos en una compañía 7 o 10 años o más, estando verdaderamente
7 or 10 years or longer, and working really hand in hand with the entrepreneurs in the trenches and working with them and doing all we can to bring those models ahead. And two, it allows us to actually push those risk borders, that is, invest in models that are actually innovative, that are doing things that are actually interesting from the scalability, financial scalability standpoint, and starting in new markets, but especially pushing those borders from the social impact standpoint. In Latin America, we are invested in, or we intend to invest in three main industries. That is kind of the investment thesis: education, energy, and agribusiness, being these the most important ones. So I'm going to explain the other ones so that I can focus my attention on agribusiness at the end. In education, the investment thesis is not just in investing in a university, in a formal university, but investing in companies that are distributing educational contents in an innovative manner. Many times leaning on technological platforms, what we call today educational technology, or ET. And the focus from the social standpoint has been to identify vulnerable communities, generally youth, and try to help that youth with our intervention to bring them into being more employable, to be more necessary for the work market. In the energy sector, we are focusing on distributing clean energies in rural areas that are not interconnected. And in Colombia, is in the post-conflict. Latin America has a coverage network for energy, which is very significant. However, the regions that are not interconnected are really remote, and they generally have very little accessibility. So the investment thesis from the energy point of view is bringing the energy, clean energy and renewable energy to rural areas of a post-conflict that are not interconnected, and also rural remote areas in Latin America. And the agribusiness thesis is to invest in entrepreneurships that increase productivity and facilitate access to small markets. So what we're trying to do is connect these small producers with the value chains. And here I'm going to hook another topic, which is the topic that is important to us. That is one of the investments from our portfolio, one of not just one of the most successful ones, but one that makes us very proud due to the impact it's had. So what this Cacao de Colombia does is that they disrupted the market, the cocoa market in Colombia, due to a possible disruption, because the cocoa market in Colombia was dominated mainly by two buyers that were a monopoly, that would pay prices for that cocoa that were low or very low, submitting then the cacao growers being under the poverty level. And the really interesting and paradoxical is that cocoa is originated in America, in Latin America, and the best cocoa of the world is produced here in this area near the Ecuador, in America, near the border with Colombia and Ecuador, and some of the countries of the Caribbean. And so we had some cocos that were excellent quality that were being wasted because they were paid very low. And then you had produced chocolate of very low quality. So Cacao de Colombia noticed about this competitive advantage, and then they started copying cocoa of very high quality in rural areas of post-conflict in Colombia, and favoring then those communities that have been traditionally very vulnerable. with the indigenous communities in Tumaco and the Arhuacos in the Sierra Nevada, Santa Marta, and country communities, pheasants communities in Arauca and Boyacá. So what Cacao de Colombia does is they dry it using and produce it using world quality cocoa, and it is exported to produce very good chocolate, and then they use it to produce the chocolate bars that are produced in the factory that is located in Popayán in the south of Colombia, and that chocolate bars are sold very well in the Colombian market and also in the international market in Japan. So Cacao de Colombia collects the cocoa from small producers, favors communities that traditionally have been vulnerable, and pays prices that are above the market and that are stable, so that small producers are able to have the cocoa growing activity as an important source of support, and they can use this cocoa activity to substitute illegal crops. Now, from the standpoint of the selection process and the due diligence process in the fund, first of all, we focus on four things that are not strange to any private capital fund or any impact fund of investment. One is the stage. We invest on early stage companies that have evidence of adoption in the market who are testing their model. So we look for companies that are in the early stages but that have some type of evidence. And the entrepreneur team, which is of course a very important team or bet, I'm sorry, for any private investment or risk investment team. It is really a bet these companies are doing. So we look for entrepreneurs who have the vision, the competencies, and the willing that is necessary to execute business plans. But something that we reiterate a lot is for those entrepreneurs to be aligned from the standpoint of values, for them to see the social impact of their business as something that is actually really very important. And then I'm going to skip to the third point, which is the impact. And then we look for the companies to have intrinsic social impact as part of their business model using the three criteria that I'm going to explain in a little minute. And I want to emphasize this intrinsic model, which is the critical root of the company, the financial strategy, the strategy to penetrate market includes social impact, and for it not to be just something positive and external of the business. And then, as any other investor, we look at the sustainability and scalability, financial scalability. We look for companies that are operating in markets that have great potential, and we try to do as much as possible to give them everything possible for them to be successful from the financial standpoint. Sustainability and scalability from the financial standpoint are very linked to the impact portion, because we think that as long as these companies are sustainable, scalable, and successful, the impact is going to be greater. And now to round up this idea with Cacao de Colombia's case, if they can sell more chocolate bars at the local and international level, and they can export these beans of cocoa to exporters around the world, and they're going to be buying more cocoa from more vulnerable communities and from more small producers in small parts of Colombia, thus increasing their impact. From the due diligence process standpoint, we focus on what other funds do. We look in detail the financial projections of a company. We do every type of sensibility. We try to get to a very accurate valuation processes. We analyze market penetration, competition, risks. We analyze very carefully management and the board of directors of the company. And maybe unlike other funds that are more traditional, again, the impact part is something that we look for very carefully, which is also primordial for our due diligence model and our thesis. Regarding the financial instruments that we use, Traditionally, our investments in Latin America, we've used preferent stocks structures, and in most of our investments, and for the case investments with the communities I mentioned, initially we have an exit strategy. We use these preferent stocks, but we have an exit strategy, which is a fund to repurchase the stocks. As these companies start generating cash and they become being successful, we start creating a fund to repurchase those stocks for contingencies and for repurchase of stocks. So our exit is to the company itself, in order for in the future, when all our actions are purchased, the community has a company that is sustainable from the financial standpoint, that is successful, and that it is a significant asset for the community. Regardless of the mechanism that we use as an investment strategy, we always look for to be a minority stockholder in the companies, and we take between 25 and 45% of participation in the stock capital, and this allows us to have a sit in the board of director, which is very important to our strategy and our investment model. That is to be able to be sitting there in the board of director, leading the strategic things that are most important in the companies. And as Alan mentioned before, we have the possibility to give non-financial support through technical assistance funds that we have as part of our intrinsic business model. We have a series of in-house experts, and if we also have a series of experts in our network of contacts that can give assistance to the companies in a great number of different aspects in governance, financial support, human resources, market access, and of course, measuring the impact. Now, going to impact measurement, as I said at the beginning, Acumen has its own methodology to measure impact, which is called lean data, which not long ago, like 18 months ago, it was ascended into an independent company which is called 60 Decimals, which is located in New York also. But the methodology continues to be the same, and basically, it is that we measure the social impact, and it takes advantage of the mobile technology power to communicate directly with the beneficiaries, collecting impact data in an efficient manner and in a fraction of time than the traditional approaches. It is a really powerful impact measurement because it goes to the end beneficiary of the intervention of our investments. So that has a very big power because we can see directly how our investments are affecting or impacting the population or the community that we want to impact. And lean data works basically in three main pillars, or very important pillars, that are the number of lives or direct or indirect beneficiaries that are benefited from this investment, the depth of the meaning of the impact, that is how deep is that impact from that investment, and focus on poverty. What percentage of the people that is benefited by the intervention of this company are part of in the poverty or under the line of poverty. In Colombia, we use the line of poverty as determined by DAN in Colombia. So that is, in a nutshell, the way the lean data works. Each project, of course, is organized in a customized manner. Every intervention by lean data is very well planned depending on the industry and the characteristics of the company, and of course, depending on the characteristics of the beneficiaries. It is not the same, I don't know, to run a survey in Ciudad Bolívar in Bogotá, where you have remote access, and where a lot of people have cell phones, to do that in Chocó or in San Jose del Guaviare, I don't know, or these type of things. And going back to Cacao de Colombia, we have done some impact measurements throughout time. The last one was in 2019, and the previous to that one was in 2017. And I'm going to explain to you in a nutshell what these results mean. In 2017, we interviewed 100 small producers that were selling cocoa to Cacao de Colombia. And those producers showed that their income had increased between 58 and 75% in comparison to the best alternative. The best alternative, or the only alternative, or the one that they have, is to sell their products to these monopolies in Colombia that pay very low market prices, or prices that go under the market prices, submitting them to not just being able to live on cocoa as an exclusive activity, but also to be obliged to have some side activities. So that increase from 58 to 75% increase of the income allowed these cocoa grower to devote their activities into growing cocoa, take advantage of those higher prices that Cacao de Colombia pays for quality cocoa, and also take advantage of that income stability that means having an activity with a company that is active and that has a series of positive results: access to education, access to health, and another series of things that are a little bit more subjective, that are harder to measure, but that we have evidence to, such as, for example, more time with our family. If a grower can devote their time to just one activity, which is growing cocoa, and they have just one buyer that will stably buy that cocoa, instead of having several sources for income, they can, of course, devote more time to having activities, recreational activities with their family and all that. In 2019, the results were a little bit better, with a base of small producers of 275, and we saw that income went from 64 to 150% higher, and we also clearly evidence that we have had improvements in these families, in households, in education and health, and other positive things such as free time and spending time with their families to do some other activities. So that is what I have so far. I think I'm right on time, Mr. Moderator, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions from the audience. Thank you again for having me, and I am really pleased to be able to present all this to all of you. Thank you very much, Jorge. While we wait for the people to join us and make questions, one of the practices that we try to promote from Latin Pacto is trying to see impact in two ways. So you just mentioned, you just talked about the Cacao Hunters has on the beneficiary that, thanks to your support, is always scaling, and it is greater and greater, that impact. But we also think it is important to understand the impact the investor for impact, in this case, Acumen, has in that organization and those entrepreneurs, Cacao Hunters. So you just mentioned that you go into the trenches. That's the word that you used. So you were there and you've been there. So 38 minutes ago, you left the board of directors from Cacao Hunters. So please tell us a little bit more about what is the impact of being in the board of directors and being sitting there with that non-financial support. What is the impact that you see that you can have in these organizations that you invest on? Very good question. In Cacao de Colombia specifically, and in most of our companies of our portfolio, initially, generally, or in most of the cases, we try through our investment to have a seat in the board of directors of the companies in order to be able to guide the strategy of the company and to have direct influence. We are, unlike other funds, for risk capitals, we are a very active investor. We are actually involved with those investors, initial investors, and the company founders. We invest in early stages generally. There's been a sales track record, so we have some type of proof that the business model works. But many times these companies need some market penetration strategies. They need to sophisticate their processes, both for governance and management, general management, human resources processes. And so the non-financial support that we offer covers a lot of things. And we see that as an intrinsic part of our business model. And we have seen that it has a very significant impact on our companies. Cacao de Colombia was a very small company when we started, not just to, brag about it, because that's not our case to do some commercial here. But generally, what we actually did was we were the first institutional stockholder that we had. And in most of the cases, when we invest, we are the first stockholder. And that allows the companies to restructure their processes so that they can submit the data the way we want, to make their accounting processes more sophisticated, the reporting processes, the internal control processes. So having an investor as Acumen helps them have an impact on the business model itself. Since we are so repetitive and we see the impact in such an important manner, there is an influence, maybe I would say, which is the most important, which is preventing to have a deviation from the original social mission, which we'll call in English the mission drift, which is a company starting with a social objective. They want to do some things, and at some point, due to anything, business things or market things, they deviate. And so we make sure that that impact that is part of the DNA of the company is actually there, because that is actually part of our investment strategy, but also from what we want to do from the impact standpoint. So we have seen a lot of progress, and we have seen the evolution in those companies covers a very very broad part of those companies. So here we have a question, Vicente. Please don't be embarrassed. Open your mic and your camera, and I think you have a question about impact. Yeah, I can be the witness. I can be the infomercial of Acumen, because I am the director of Wasi Organics, a company in Peru, and Acumen invested in us. We are business partners and friends, and I can talk about the big added value of having an institutional investing partner, such as Acumen in the board of directors and in the process to do a startup grow with a global or regional presence without forgetting that very important point of social impact. So now the infomercial of Acumen is me, done by someone who doesn't work with Acumen. But I had a question, Jorge. I found that it was very interesting what you mentioned about lean data. Can you please elaborate about that and give us some examples as to how that can be applied, that concept of lean data? Yeah, sure. Thank you, Vicente. In the case of the portfolio of Acumen's portfolio company, most of them in Latin America are in the agricultural sector. What we have been able to do is directly talk to the producers that supply raw materials to these companies, and actually be able to see the impact that our investment is having on those small producers. So in many of the cases, what we do is we have a direct service. We go directly to the producers when the technology is not available for that. For example, we had a tour where we were able to travel before the pandemic, and we went to Medio Atrato, and we went to interview a series of rice growers for a potential investment that we want to do in a company with a community in Medio Atrato. And what we do is, through some specific surveys, we analyze the way the intervention of purchasing rice or cocoa will specifically benefit the companies. Not just in the income part, which is maybe the most evident one and maybe the easiest to measure, but also through other series of metrics that is less palpable and less measurable, but are just as important. So with some specific data and with some very specific surveys, we ask the people how their life quality has improved in general. And that is our starting point to start threading light with these type of questions. You have children, if they go to school, how many have been able to complete their studies, if they have access to health, and all that. And all these levels of income, additional income that you have received due to the activity that you do with our company, it has helped having these better. They say yes, before selling cocoa to Cacao Colombia, we didn't have access to health, but now after that, and thanks to the additional income, we have been able to achieve this and that. And many times the companies themselves, for example, Cacao Colombia, and a series of technical assistance in improving the growth of cocoa, in allowing the cocoa growers to dry cacao with very high standards of quality and being able to buy that for higher prices, helping those cocoa growers to have organic certifications, to get higher prices for special cocos. We measure all that through these studies, because all this is less feasible to be seen, or less palpable to be seen in numerical terms, but it has a gigantic importance in these communities. There is another very important factor regarding the lean data part when you work with these communities, and that is when you substitute illegal cultivation crops. For example, in the post-conflict areas, you help these communities of cocoa growers in Tumaco, or rice growers in Atrato. They can have more agency, they can be more autonomous, and they can have a stronger voice. And these are some very positive results that are extremely important and that we have been bringing little by little with our work. Those are additional variables that we want to start including in our lean data studies, because we have seen how important they are. Traditionally, Vicente is from Puerto Rico, but his heart is in Peru. What's happened in the post-conflict areas, many Colombian people know about this, is that the illegal groups, they have, created like a war among the communities or members of those communities. And so having a joint activity in the communities, being able to grow cocoa as a common objective, growing rice as a common objective, has had that positive result, to have the people believing in this work again. And that has been a very positive result that we have seen, which is part of the impact and that we want to measure. It's a very long answer, but I hope I have satisfied. Perfect. Thank you, Jorge. Jorge, now talking a little bit about costs, I would also like you to talk a little bit about, because measuring also has a cost implicit there, and you see that a lot of investors have a dilemma to do a trade-off. I will give you more money, or I will give you a greater donation to the initiative, or should I use part of that budget to measure? So if you could talk a little bit about the costs of lean data, and if you bring that to the entrepreneur or you cover that. And also talking about technical assistance, I know that you work with USAID offering technical assistance to cocoa growers. Is that done through that patient capital in your fund, or do you look for allies and for them to work with those cocoa growers as an international cooperation externally? Great question. I am going to go back to the point of different nature of this Pioneer Fund by mobilizing donors' resources. That has brought very important advantages, because in most of the cases, what we do with these strategic partners, we call them donors, but what we actually have is cooperation agreements, both with USAID and Bancolombia, Fundación Bancolombia, and with Fondo Multidonante para la Paz de la ONU. And so what we have done is a series of agreements for cooperation where we have specific headings that are assigned for this. So for USAID and for Fundación Bancolombia and for most of our allies, it is as important as it is to us measuring the impact, and it is important as it is for us being able to add value from the technical assistance standpoint. So in most of the cases, we have specifically designed funds for them for each one of those cooperation agreements. So we have funds that have been allocated for investment, funds that have been allocated for technical assistance, measuring impact, and we also have the possibility to move a series of headings as long as we do what we said we were going to do at that level. So unlike many of the traditional funds for investment, both for impact and non-impact, in this case, we don't have that because those are funds that have already been allocated to do that. So we don't have that. So it takes a little time from the employees, some operational internal costs from Acumen, my time from the people that works with us both in New York and in Colombia. But the big chunk of those costs is already included in those clusters or agreements. When you talk about funds, are they all in those pioneer funds? Are those like pockets? Yeah, most of them it's like pockets. Yeah, that's a good term. We have the cooperation agreements that go all into the big bag of a fund or a program that we have in the USAID that is called Fondo Invirtiendo para la Paz, which is the fund investing for peace. And then what they are is basically pockets. However, they are well aligned from the strategic standpoint and the impact standpoint. So in most of the cases, we can use them as a complement with very few exceptions. So here we have another question. I would like to talk about other stages of the investment project process. Micaela has another question about impact, and then I will ask questions about the other stages. So Micaela, you have the floor. Thank you. I wanted to ask, what are the difficulties that you find when it comes to time to measure these baselines and the result and the impact in general in these areas where there is conflict and where you have this like fight that you mentioned before that makes this a relationship with the communities in the territory that is more complex? Thank you for your question, Micaela. Yes. Impact measuring in the Colombian regions is an end number, has an end number of complications. One of them is access, getting to those places due to, public order or just regular accessibility. For example, for this measurement in Medio Atrato, in this community of rice growers, go into Choco and then row into a little boat in the River Atrato in those pangas, which is those little boats so that we could measure the impact. So the operational thing is really cumbersome and expensive. So I would not call it an obstacle, but it is a significant challenge for us to be able to do this type of work. The second thing is access to technology. Again, if we are not able to go directly and we want to run surveys on the phone or through the internet, well, access to these means of communication is also a challenge and is hard. And then in the end, in many cases, we have the levels of literacy of the people for them to be able to read a survey. And if they cannot, then we can explain to them with simple words and easy words exactly what we want to ask them and for them to understand that. So one thing is just to write a survey that is perfect and impeccable, written by an expert in New York or written by an expert sitting down here in Bogota. A completely different thing is actually bring that survey and run it to a rural grower in the language that we want to use. So what we have been able to see and that is a learned lesson that is interesting, is as we measure the impact, is one thing is the survey that we want to conduct, and then as we start implementing it, we need to change it and we need to fine tune it to make it in an easy language and for the grower to understand what we want to ask them. For example, percentage, that concept. 1% of your income comes from cocoa. That for a person who went to grade school, just the third grade, that is a bad question. That is not a good question. The question should be, if we said that you sell 100 pesos of all your products, out of that 100 pesos, how much of that comes from cocoa? That is a better way to make the question. So those levels of literacy, basic literacy, also we find like an interesting challenge to be able to do that work for measurement. We always have that possibility. If you want to do it, you can do it. And if you want to do that, you will find a way to run those surveys and to overcome those challenges when you see this as a priority. But that was an excellent question, Micaela. Gracias. Thank you. I see a question that I am going to complement, maybe. You are working with philanthropic capital, and I am sure that many of these foundations are international. Of course, we have Fundación Bancolombia. But the question is, how can we have those changes that are being generated in the territory be sustainable? So the question is, do you work with local governments? What can be the role of mobilizing other actors that are closer to the territory? And what would be your role as part of that? Great question to Calvin. Actually, all investments, to be honest, are new, relatively new. We haven't had an exit yet in any of those companies to be able to guarantee continuity. What we've been able to see so far is that we partner with entrepreneurs that are actually really very aligned from the value standpoint. Every investment that we do has a promoter, as an entrepreneur, or as a community that is actually aligned with Acumen from the mission and impact standpoint. And we hope that as we do those exits, we can count on the fact that that mission and that impact after our intervention can continue. How do we do that? Through responsible exits. We would never exit, or that is not part of our critical roadmap, to do an exit of an investment to a fund, to a hedge fund, or to a fund that is not aligned to our social objectives. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but using examples or pointing fingers at anybody, but just an investor that is just a capitalist that wanted to look at the company from the business standpoint, that is not the person that we are going to sell our stocks to. Since we have philanthropic capital, we can, take the luxury of being there as long as we want, and we can do an exit whenever we want to find it convenient from the strategic point of view and from the financial point of view, and strategically convenient from the social point of view. So that is the way we see our work into the future. Again, it is easier said than done. We haven't done that yet. We haven't done an exit in any of the investments that we have, but that is the objective that we have. That as Acumen, the minute Acumen is not there, whoever comes after that has the clear vision and a social mission that is clear, and they can continue working in the territory in a consistent manner. To round up my idea and to close it, if you have a company that is profitable and sustainable and financially strong, and that also has as its business model that part of the impact from a strategic point of view, then the chances of having someone want to modify that just for the sake of the commercial part and for them to deviate the mission, I would say those are slimmer and slimmer. So when we do a good job and when we bring those companies in a good way, we're guaranteeing sustainability with or without us. One of the difficulties in this study was to identify the cases. Several criteria we used, but the main ones were for them to follow the pillars of investment for impact. We talked about management, non-financial support. The third one is customized financing funding. And the fourth one was impact first. And those areas where it becomes a little bit harder from outside with a third party to assess. You say that you are impact first, but maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more as to what that means and how can you know that it is not just an investment fund that is looking for profitability and then they just use impact first as their last name to bring those philanthropic investors. So please tell us a little bit, why is it important for you to say that it is impact first and what's behind all that? Great question. I think again the fact that we are able to mobilize capital through donations and that has been the model, the model that originated Acumen through a pioneer fund gives us that possibility. And what do we mean by that? Basically, we identify companies and entrepreneurs that are starting with poverty things with very vulnerable communities. That is their starting point of any investment that we identify on the field, in the field. From that point on, financial sustainability and economic sustainability is tied to increasing and turning that impact into a more sustainable one and a bigger one. When we talk about impact, and there we are very careful before we invest, we notice that the social impact thing is actually part of the critical roadmap of those companies, that it is part of the DNA of each one of those companies instead of just a positive external show. We have a business that is going to be very successful and very commercial, and we are also benefiting XYZ population or community. The cause is completely the opposite one. The first thing is the most important to us, to benefit those communities, for that to be an intrinsic part of the business model of a company. And when you scale and sustain, and when you become successful, that will become wider and broader and more successful. Going back to cacao in Colombia, as they start selling more chocolate and export more beans of cocoa, they're going to increase their impact because they're going to be buying from more communities and they are going to be giving more technical assistance to the various producers, and they're going to be able to make that activity, that cocoa activity, to become a legal activity to substitute crops in areas that are very in well need of that in the country. So that is the question, I would say. Maybe in a nutshell is having the causes the other way around, the analysis the other way around. First the impact and then sustainability. We've heard this morning, for example, we heard Fisamerix, another fund in Chile. In the morning, we also heard from CoCapital, who are in Mexico. And we talked about that balance between the return, impact, and risk. And there I have another question, which is a provoking question. Jorge has asked me not to ask him hard questions, but I said that 12 years ago, I still remember when we were in Washington, he did something bad to me. So this is payback time. So no, when we talk about impact first, Jorge, when or how do you make a decision as to, hey, here's a big impact, but this is going to bother my profitability. So when are you willing to not make money to have that impact? How do you make that decision? Hard question, very hard. That is a dichotomy that is really significant. would say that in the companies of the Latin American portfolio, we haven't found that contradiction so far. They all have a scale with original mission and their impact mission that is original. And being in a situation like that is really a problem. It's a situation. I would say that the idea is to maximize the impact and not maximizing the profitability. I mean, we don't want companies losing money, of course. We want companies that are sustainable and that can be self-sustainable, that cover their costs and have an interesting profitability and that they can return our investment, but we don't want to maximize that profitability. Especially, we don't want to maximize it just affecting the social mission. It is a hard question, but in Acumen's case, our objective is not to maximize profitability, but just to get off profitability. So having profitability in a pioneer fund, if we are able to maximize, not to return our capital, and when we have in some of them, we're going to have good profitability. We're going to have losses in others. When we are able to return that capital, we feel that we've been successful because, again, these are business models that are really risky, that are in the border of the impact. So if we can return the capital, we think that we have been doing a good job. So it is not maximizing profitability, but it is having good profitability with the social impact that has as much as possible. Thank you. We have time for one last question. I don't know if anybody else wants to have the honor of asking the last question of this week for the lunch.
Hola, yo no quisiera hacer una
I
pregunta.
wouldn't like to make a question, but I would like to propose a topic for discussion, if I may. I have made questions in many of the sessions. What is the role played by local states? Because as part of the story I have, I work with a public institution. The local state becomes a payer, and the local state can be a partner for these projects. And that I haven't heard that discussion anywhere. Why isn't the state a partner in the projects? Because they are also entrepreneurs. They have the right to generate wealth and take advantage of that wealth. So it would be interesting to talk about that in these funds, why the state is not participating, not as a payer, but as a strategic partner, as an entrepreneurial partner, which would be a different alternative to see the role played by the state instead of the one collecting the tax and distributing the tax, but instead of that, as an entrepreneur partner. I just wanted to say that. Thank you very much for that question. I think that in a way, in the report, you're going to find a section on the role played by the public sector. And unfortunately, from Latin Pacto's side, I don't know if Acumen's side and what is Jorge's opinion, but what we've seen is that there is a lot of obstacles. It's not just that the private sector does not want to work with the public sector, but I would say it is the other way around. Sometimes it is due to the regulatory things and training the staff as part of the public officers for them to understand these new models, and also due to the changes in government. Jorge just explained that they invest 10 years. That means that you've had two periods, 2.5 periods of two different presidents and changes in the government. So that is a lot of changes that usually are not so patient to wait for those results or to make it continuous. So that is part of what we have found in the study, and that is the contribution that we can give you from Latin Impact. I don't know, Jorge would like to say something else. Yeah, right. What I was going to say was what you just said, and that is what I find as a significant obstacle when we involve national and local government. And that is exactly that continuity, priorities of governments change, the officers change very frequently, I might say. So continuity when you have a business and you need to bring a company, grow a company, continuity is basic for it to be sustainable, successful, and profitable. If you have on the other side as one of the partners, if you have the government as one of the partners and then they change that director frequently, then you're starting from scratch with very basic things, such as, for example, informing them of what is being done, the importance of the impact, how important of what is being done, what's been done is the way it is being done. And so what I see really important here is continuity, but that is an interesting topic, I would say. And I think it is really worth thinking about that. Thank you very much for bringing that up. It is a very interesting point. I don't know if Kelvin was in Fundación Corona. They have been able to get articulated with the Colombian government and create a fund in public policy to invest in social impact bonds. So we have 2 minutes before closing. So first of all, I would like to thank Jorge and Acumen for being here with us today, for being the subjects of the case, and also all of you for being brave enough and being here with us on Friday at 5, just before our weekend begins. I I know I'm going to drink a beer to close this week that was really big in rich in knowledge and best practices and discussions. And finally, those of you who are new from Latin Impacto, we invite you to our course on fundamentals of investment for impact. You can find that in Latin Impacto webpage, Latinpacto dot org events. We have several speakers that will help us understand and also let you know that all the events have been recorded and you can download them in our page on YouTube if you want to listen to our talk today or any other talk that you weren't able to take part on. And to all of you, thank you very much and have a very good week. And thank you all for your attention and thank you very much for having me. Have a happy weekend.